Ah! Oh, good
Good morning.
morning.
Good morning. It's alive.
I
It's
love the
alive.
comment. I'm
That-
so excited to have you here. Where'd it go? Boy, we got a lively chat today. Good morning, everyone. Jake
yeah,
called it out. He said, finally, off the chat and behind the camera. Oh,
Once,
we're
I
excited to
like.
have you here, Donald. Um, welcome.
thank you.
Donald, you are like the OG, like in the comments, Johnny on the spot. Like every live stream I go to, Donald, you are there. You are the omnipresent, like the watcher of all things data and the like respondent and the proponent of the Kimball methodology. It is so great to have you on this show. How are you
Thanks.
doing today, sir?
I'm doing okay. A little behind on my coffee, but I'll try not to. I don't
Well,
want to
just
drink too much or I'll get too wired up.
oh, you want to be wired up. That's how you should be. So I was saying, everybody's got to do a shot of coffee every time we say Kimball.
Oh, no, 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 no. That'd be too much. I almost, except for my employer has an anti-alcohol policy at work. I might have brought something else, but it is a little early. And so we'll skip that.
Oh,
So
oh,
yeah, so
look at all the books too. Yeah.
your bit a little bit seems to be like Chris was mentioning.
Yeah,
It
that's
feels
not
like
all the
every
book.
place you go, you work Kimball into the chat on different programs.
Yes, I do, because I just want to make sure he gets remembered. And I think its history's taking care of itself, but they're not doing it anymore. The Kimball Group has been retired for 10 years at the end of this year. I
Mm-hmm.
think it was November, December 2015, and they stopped,
And
doing their thing really.
so you've picked up that torch and feel
No,
like
no, no, no,
you're
I
going to
wouldn't
keep
do
it
that.
alive. And
And there's plenty of other people. I mean, again, even if people don't mention the name Kimball, you see somebody do a presentation on star schema and so-called dimensional modeling, and yep, there it all is, right?
right.
Even if it doesn't get mentioned. I saw a great one by on the Radicad Summit this week by Celicia, something with a B in Florida,
Okay. Yeah.
which I saw that was like a very good introduction to modeling. She had the 4 steps of Kimball of, define the process, define the grain. I should know all this by heart. Define facts, define the dimensions, whatever.
Yeah.
What? Hang on. Say that again.
The-
With the 4 steps.
Yeah.
Well, and again, I think I got them wrong, but you're trying to model a process. Okay. The
Okay.
whole point of the Kimball approach is you're not trying to build a one-off data set for a report. You're trying to figure out, okay, what process am I looking at? Do you want to record the measurements to and analyze? So, the obvious one is sales. You go to the Buckle. I work at the Buckle, a clothing retailer, fine malls everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And you buy some jeans, you go check out. Well, there's your fact. There's your measurement. Hey, this guy bought 2 jeans at this time in this store, and you know who the customer is. And you're not trying to, model a, sales report or whatever report. You say, hey, let's make sure we capture the fact of the sales, maybe the units, maybe the dollars, and make sure we get all those measurements around it, all the what we would call dimensions: date, store, customer, product. And we've got that basically done. And then the whole point is anytime you need sales data, you don't do a new copy or get the original data again from the POS system. You've got that one master copy in your so-called data warehouse. That's the one sort of true copy of sales, and you should reuse it. And then you can mash it up with other star schemas or other facts, say inventory or the purchase orders, stuff like that. Sorry, I'm going off a little bit, but
No, you're fine. So yeah, but yeah, there's those 4 basic steps to it, right? Understand the process, understand the grain, right? Define your dimensions, and what was the 4th one that you mentioned? Do you remember?
Dimensions.
Dimensions, I thought was
dimensions.
3rd.
It's
Facts, process, grain,
facts, dimension.
facts, dimensions.
Yes.
And I was going to ask while you were there to count the number of books. There's been comments about the books that you have there, so we'll have to get a count sometime.
This little stack. No, it's really pretty. This isn't all of them by any means. I mean, I've got every edition. So again, some of these books have 3 editions. So go multiply that by by hand.
Well, what I think is interesting is share a couple of the stories of how you've come about some of these editions. How do you find some of these books that, I mean, they're not really in print all the time, right?
Well, hold on 1 second. Hold on before we jump to that. We just
What?
dove straight into the heart of this conversation, and it's because we have Mr. Kimball here himself, Donald Parish. So it's great to be here. And I want to hear that stuff, but we have a few things I want to make sure that we get out there and then we talk about. Okay, so number one, we have 2 rules, right? Please prefix any questions with the Q so that we can, make sure that we get those queued up. Don't spam the chat or that sort of thing. We don't really have much of an issue with that. I also want to hit out big shout out to all of our SML fans and whatnot. I'm so glad to see you. If any of you are at FabCon, stop by. I've got SML stickers for all of us. So come by and check that out. And if you are at FabCon, if you swing by, we're going to be doing Ask an MVP live at FabCon. So if you've got questions, issues, or items that you're looking to resolve, swing by, ask those questions, and we'll be going live with those Q&As right from FabCon. So do that as well. Okay.
Oh, that'll be interesting.
Yeah. So now that you're going, Kevin, you'll have to.
I was going to say, now's a good time to announce. Yeah, I had a change in plans, and I will be at FabCon now. So that's kind of nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Excited to have you there. Now, Donald, we dove head first in to your technology. You kind of briefly hit on where do you work? Can you give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm just a humble Power BI, Power Pivot sort of guy. Real quick, I started out in the Air Force as an intelligence officer, even though I had an engineering degree. Well, system science, but it was in the electrical engineering department at Michigan State. So they don't use that, and they make me an intelligence officer. So I got to look at overhead photos with the little microscope thing for a while, and did that for about 10 years. And then wife wanted to move back to her hometown in Nebraska, Kearney, Nebraska. So I've been here 25 years now. So when I was in the Air Force, computers was kind of my hobby in programming. Like I started doing some VBA in 1944 when I was in the desert to automate some clean out a Word template every night. Instead of doing it by hand, I figured out I could turn on the macro recorder and program it. And I went from there. And it turned out my first job with the Buckle was basically taking over all the VBA that the founder of the company, who was also a computer programmer on the side, had done, and pushed that over to me. We actually ran our e-commerce platform. It just started that year, running on a duct tape of Excel VBA with SQL and an Access database. And we ran that for about 4 or 5 years on that before it got moved off to other stuff.
Wow.
And then I did some other web development. There's this thing called Ruby on Rails out there. Of course, I did some Java programming. And then anyway, I started doing, and I did reports on the side. Okay. Pivot tables, of course. I did discover pivot tables in 97. Anyway, so when Power Pivot came out, I started using that. We had an analysis server sitting around because, hey, SQL servers everywhere. Hey, can I use this? Did some work with that, and basically went full time into doing reports and the Power BI type stuff about 2016 or so is when I was doing full time, even though I had done some stuff for probably 10 or 15 years by that point. So I've got both worlds. I know how to, again, I haven't done a lot of real programming lately, and I've got to learn Python properly someday. If so, it'll be the last language I properly learned, but I'll get there. I mean, it's not that. Hey, at least thank God it doesn't have curly Q's and semicolons. So it kind of reminds me of VBA. It makes me feel a little friendlier. So it's okay.
Just the indenting that gets me all the time. So
yes. But that being said, and I don't want to get a rise out of you, Kevin, I love Power Query. Now I'm a programmer.
Oh, you love Power Query.
Okay. Yeah. But I have not done any data analysis, reshaping the data using code when I can go to Power Query, fire that up real quick, do my thing. And because I'm a smart programmer, I can go in there and say, oh, well, hey, I could clean these 4 steps up with a function, a custom function or something. And I'll go in there and clean it up. And of course, people like Goodley's channel, Chandeep and Goodley. I mean, you can go crazy. It's really good. It's actually in a good language. I love it. Anyway, that's a
Oh,
little
I think it is a good language. It's not the one that I use first, right? So it's,
okay.
you know,
But
and
I do
I
have a
work more
confession.
inside databases all the time, so I always push it a little bit more upstream. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah, but I
it's,
just think, you know, again, I think we're sort of trying to push maybe some of the lower end, you know, Power BI type user a little too much to
Mhm.
notebooks and Python. When my thing has always been, look, if you can do it in Power Query because of the problem or the scale or the size, just go ahead and get by with that as far as you can. And I still tend to prototype almost everything I do gets prototyped in a Power Query on desktop first before I try to, okay, now we got to bring it into the data warehouse and go through all the steps in there just so I can check out the data.
yeah, I think that's a good approach. Then as you need to scale it up or whatever, it feels like, excuse me, you're better off
Okay.
pushing it back to,
Now, I
you
do have a
know,
confession, by the way.
your end. Go ahead.
You want to guess
Let's-
what year I actually read Kimball?
2 years ago.
1904.
No.
No?
Kevin's pretty
Okay. All
close.
right.
The spring of 2021.
Wow. Shut up. You've
Well,
been
I
on it
mean-
much longer than that, haven't you?
Well, I'd heard of them, but look, he had classes. Now, of course, they stopped doing the class in 2015. And I had noticed that. And then I did notice, oh, wow, they're retiring. Oh, well, I guess I'm never going to go to that. And it's like, you know, $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000, whatever it was, right? And then you go look at their books. It's like, hey, it's $50 for a freaking Kindle. I'm not making out money here. You know, where's my $30 book? So actually, again, don't tell anybody. My first copy was a PDF I found on the internet. But I do have plenty of copies, legal copies now.
We could edit that part out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Don't want to get in trouble. But
Hey,
no,
and,
honestly, I hadn't.
hang on 1 second. I almost forgot something. This is not a promise, and this is not gambling, because I don't have. There's no randomization to this. But if you're sitting in this audience and you're thinking, "Gee, if I could get a free pass to FabCon," I would book a ticket and I would get a hotel room and I would go. If you're sitting there, send me an email to chris.wagner@bakertilly.com. This is not a promise. This is not a commitment. I got someone who might be able to help you with that. So if you're in this audience, this ends. I think this opportunity either ends today or ends Monday. But if you're interested, I'll happy to hook you up with that. Okay, so send me an email. It has to be connected to like a company account. So don't send me Gmail emails and stuff like that. It can't be transferred. So if it's not for you, if it's for someone else, give them my email address and I'll see what I can do. No commitments on that, but I've got someone who said that they could help with a free pass or two. So
And the
send me an
email is
email on that.
scrolling at the bottom of your screen.
Yes, it's scrolling at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to leave that up in case there's anyone watching this on repeat. I think it's end of day on Friday, February 28th. There's an outside chance on Monday. But I'll no promises, but if I can help, I will help. Okay. So I'll leave this up for everyone. Just
Cool.
because I was going on in chat. Apologies.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So, but yeah, I did not start reading until 2021 because I had a modeling problem. Because here's the deal, you know, the dimensional design approach or the star scheme approach is so easy. You don't really need to read a whole bunch of books to do anything simple. The way I started was I had a data. I wasn't formally trained as a computer programmer, right? I had plenty of programming. I'm, you know, engineer and stuff, right? Fortran basic when I was a kid. But I had a database class in 2000 because I'm like, you know, I never had a database class. I also did what do you call it? Algorithms and data structures and algorithms class before that too, you know, ON notation and all that. So I took a database class and when I got into using analysis services in 2000, because I found a copy, I'm like, oh, okay, this is interesting. I went to the back of that database book and covered a chapter they didn't cover on data warehousing and stuff. And there's your start scheme. Okay, oh, this is easy. You got your store, you got your, you know, your product, whatever, and you got your cells, easy. And you can drive that a pretty long ways. So it wasn't until I got into some programming or, you know, modeling problems and we had some disputes at work is when like, okay, I need to research this and see if I can find the answer. So I, of course, went through Chris Adamson's book, who, of course, is another, you know, data god, as it were, out
Mhm.
there. And he's, of course, still active. He runs the education program for the Data Warehouse Institute, TDW, however the acronyms come out.
This, Chris?
Yes.
Yeah.
And by the way, Ralph Kimball wrote introductions to both of his earlier books.
Oh, really?
Because Adamson.
This is the book, though. So Donald, the
Yep.
challenge I have with that book that you're sharing right there versus this book is that book also talks about there's a number of data modeling techniques that exist out there, right? So like there's Inman, there's there's oh my gosh, what's it?
Data Vault.
Data Vault.
Data
Yeah.
Vault's the other big one, which I can't understand. I mean, I did my college try. I tried to look at it. I'm like, I don't see what's here, why I need to want to do this. I really don't see it.
So can I explain where I think Data Vault fits in well?
Yeah.
I think Data Vault fits in well as the design model schema for a silver layer, right?
Yeah, okay.
So bronze is your raw landed data that mirrors the source systems. Silver is supposed to be where you transform and capture your business logic, right? Gold is your star schema and model. I think that pattern, while not perfect, there's weaknesses there. I think that's a real good pattern for build and development. But we don't have to go deep onto that. So,
and
maybe that's a different show.
Yeah, and I think I have seen that where someone did all, and then but again, if you need all that fancy back end, and that's one of the biggest differences between the Kimball's group's approach and say people like Inman and others is how much do you do on that back end that's different? So in the Kimball approach, basically the idea is you have the front room and the back room. So the front room being the gold layer, that's what the users are going to see. They don't have access to the raw data, okay? And someone could argue, well, maybe this data scientist should. Well, honestly, you should have good enough, clean enough data in the gold layer. They should be able to take that, hopefully, still and do what they need to do, because you should have details at that gold level. But everything else there should basically be off limits. And the idea would be do as much structure as you need to do. Inman is more of you need to have basically what looks like a transactional, fully third normal form database, all complicated and stuff from there. And then you're going to somehow magically build conformed, what he called data marts, which I don't really like the word because it kind of has been overused.
And not only it's been overused, but it's got a real negative connotation that's been associated with it.
As a matter of fact, the Kimball stopped using it. They sort of basically call it business processes or something. The idea being each data mart is business processes are a collection of star schema business processes to do things. Because the data mart people think, oh yeah, everybody just goes directly to the raw source, grabs their data, throws it into some sort of model, and then presents it. And you have all these copies of data and copies of ETL, like I was talking about the first, that you want to avoid. So the approach the Kimball people took was more you do the cleanup you need to do, and that could inform. Obviously, everyone someone gives you a fully formed, nice database, even if things like say your dimensions are third normal form. So you got a product, you got a subcategory, you got a category. Fine, I can always merge all those in together when I want to get things into that one dimension table, and it goes against what you sort of taught in the database school. But the thing to remember, and this is one of the big points Kimball made when he was getting started publishing things in '94, was you've got two processes. You're getting the data into the system. You're doing the transactions. You got to take the money. You sell the jeans at the counter. You got to take the money. You got to record it properly, right? But then when you times to get the data out, you know what? It turns out you probably need a simpler structure. Now you can have a smart programmer go write a bunch of SQL against the complicated transaction database. You can do that, and you get your one-off reports, and every time someone asks for something new, someone's got to go in there and figure things out and write some more SQL. And to me, the whole point of the BI is to simplify that transactional data, redesign it, reform it, whatever you want to call it, into more what you'd call a dimensional design. I'm not even saying this is a dimensional model. We'll get into that in a little bit, where it's simple, because the whole point of source schema is, well, it's all the same, right? I got fact in the middle. I got a bunch of dimensions. I try to reuse all the dimensions I can. Easy.
And as you kind of brought up though, right? Somebody that was smart, that started off just hitting the operational system, could write certain queries or whatever to produce certain reports. And we still see those in operational systems today, but they're usually very much controlled. What started happening was people were throwing queries against those systems, and then all of a sudden
Yeah.
they were raising, either raising the cost of what it took to implement that, or causing performance problems on the sales side. And you didn't want to do that, right? You want to record that sales transaction, get it in there, and be done with it.
So here's where I'm going to give William Inman some credit. Okay. Because the whole point, initially, there was a controversy is, well, do you need a separate data warehouse database system from that operational database? Why make another copy of the data, right? And honestly, there are some good reasons for that, because once you make a copy, you're going to have another set of problems. But the whole idea of a separate analytical database, a data warehouse, that was, Bill Inman was a huge proponent of that thing. And then the controversy between him and Kimball was more of, well, what form should it take? And, Inman was more of no, it should look like a regular database. And honestly, I'd love to see one of those actually in action anywhere, because it seems to me the other approach, the dimensional approach, the star schema approach of Kimball and many others like Adamson and stuff, is the one that everyone's using.
Well, there was an article from Inman that came out that said what he called the data mart part of it. He really even said that's where you go into what Kimball's doing, right? You do use his dimensional modeling, right? So I mean, after kind of watching all of it progress for a number of years, right, it really did come out to be they were closer aligned. There's one article, and I know you mentioned it once before, right? It was like the tale of two architectures.
Oh,
and
no.
in that he did talk about how when you get to the end of what's presented to the end users, the architectures are closer than they are farther apart.
And I got okay. And Inman, I don't think has ever fairly compared his method to Kimball's. I think the Kimball group has done a fair job of trying to compare both approaches. Inman always kind of twists things around, and I don't really like that. I mean, even taking when the Kimball group had a data mart diagram showing, hey, here's why you don't want to use data marts, because everyone's copying the data. Inman took that and used it and said, hey, look, I found this in this Kimball book. Look what they're showing. They're doing all this crazy stuff. I'm like, whoa, dude, you took that out of context here. And by the way, if you go to LinkedIn, Inman's still out there, your crazy uncle, and he's still putting BS out on LinkedIn posts where he'll.
Oh, he was one of the big influencers on the medallion architecture coming about. Right.
Oh,
and
he
worked closely.
Then
He worked closely with Databricks, and Databricks was the one that kind of started the marketing on it and everything.
I wish you told me that. Okay.
Oh yeah. He let me see if I could find it.
He's the big influencer on Medallion.
That was my understanding.
Really?
Anyway.
Yeah.
But enough about him. We didn't come here to talk about Bill Inman. Okay. But anyway, but the controversy comes down to how much should you do? And the Kimball group's always been, you do as much, clean up and stuff that you need to do in the back end, but you don't have to make a full-fledged database.
So this is an Inman one. So
where the hell you actually bought that with money? By the way, people, so if you want to read Inman without giving him directly money, what you can do is turn on an O'Reilly.com subscription. You can get it for $50 a month. Might be the best approach, because then you got to use it, right? Or sometimes they put their $500 a year on sale for $300. Because all these books I'm showing you, even the ones that you can't buy in Kindle, you can read for, once with the subscription online. Even the Chris Adamson books and stuff. And it's not just the O'Reilly books; it's the Wiley books, all sorts of stuff. So if you're interested in anything, just get a list of books you've been wanting to think about buying or reading. Go turn on that subscription for a month and go read a bunch of books. Heart palpitations.
So Chris, have you seen? We've had a few questions come in while we were going into those big chats here. So
sorry, there've been a number of people who've sent requests, hoping for tickets. I've been trying to help weed those out. I'll say everyone who has emailed me has. I have submitted your name into the little thing. Woo-hoo. I don't know if you're going to get it or not, but
good luck, everybody.
Yeah, good luck.
But if we go back a bit, Chewy had a question. I don't know if you could see that.
Oh, was that about every book, or
have you read all Kimball books since 2021?
Okay. This is the one book I have not read from cover to cover yet. And I'm not saying I read every edition from cover to cover, but at least one edition of every book. So this is a book that you can't get a Kindle version, at least at Amazon. Again, you could probably read it on O'Reilly. I just happen to get, again, all these books I'm showing, most of them, you go to used bookstores, $7 or something, maybe. We're not talking expensive. And remember, until they change it, shipping books is basically free. So it's usually like maybe $3 shipping, on a $5 book or something. But this is an ETL book. And by the way, with Fabric, ETL, that's what Fabric kind of is, the back end part, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, again, the Kimball Group, it's like everyone else says, hey, look, ETL is probably 80% of your workload and stuff.
Right.
Yep. So quite a bit of what they talk about is the whole process that they use to try to get the data in and clean it up.
Yeah.
So, and that's one of the advantages of things like Fabric is, again, I'm going to, a good old fashioned, hey, let me just do it in Power Query. Now, if you're going to go do some of the other Kimball things, like slowly changing dimensions, surrogate keys, most of the time you're going to need to have that sort of done in some back end thing. Because usually you've got to have that master list of things, and then you bring in new data and say, oh, does this match one of the existing rows? If it does, fine, that's my surrogate key identifier I use. Otherwise, the guy created a new one. And that's, some people have done it. I think, I don't know if it's Fernando or someone else was showing how to do surrogate keys in Power Query. A little difficult.
Yeah, you could do it. It gets a little bit more challenging in Power Query, but I think you're right.
But there's so many stuff in here. I mean, obviously the technology is different, but not that much different. The ideas are the same.
The concepts, the process would be very similar.
So
right, and just the implementation is new. So
I think, Donald, what you've hit the nail on the head is, if we think of the body of people who use Excel to load and manage and look at analytical data, right? We look at that large body. Power Query is sufficient for this many people, right? Of that group of people, right? There's this little tiny group on the side who use a ton of data where that's going to be insufficient for, and they should look at like something more than Power Query. And that's why I'll echo it. It's about the Sal's comments on like, hey, Power Query is really sufficient for a huge chunk of the population, right? So, those people.
And one other thing I'll mention too. So there's two questions. I saw a question come through there.
Yeah. So what's your favorite book, and remember do you reread over other books?
So to answer that one, that would be the Kimball Group Reader.
Really?
Okay? Because it's a thick book here. So because besides writing the books, Kimball and Margie Ross, his co-author on the second edition, and others, and I don't think she gets enough credit. We're writing monthly articles for DBMS magazine, which later turned into Intelligent Enterprise and stuff. So they wrote like, I don't know, 250 articles over basically from say 1995 to about 2005, 2007. They had monthly articles going there. And then they were obviously started sort of doing their own blog type articles about that time too. So those are all collected in here in kind of an organized way. And the nice part is they're bite-sized. You're not reading a whole book or even a whole chapter book. You're just reading this short little few pages on some different problem. And this actually obviously goes into, in some places, goes into more detail than you would get in even some of the books. So I just love this. And the writing's good. I can go back and...
that's not a great thing.
Whoa. Yeah, you got to watch those extra things there. The other thing, by the way, to get a flavor
all that
of
tracker stuff on there.
Yeah, holy crap.
To get a flavor of this, by the way, for free, because I'm telling you some free or cheaper ways to get things. If you go to kimballgroup.com, or is it thekimballgroup.com, it'll basically get you to a page of resources where they have what they call design articles or something. And then a lot of these articles that are collected in this book are basically there for free. Not all of them are. There's more things in the book than you can get online, but you can certainly get a ton of that stuff for free and get a feeling for how, I don't want to think how things change, because honestly, the funny thing is, in the 96 original book, most of the main stuff, nothing's really fundamentally changed. Probably the biggest change was in about 98 is when they started to emphasize the conformed dimension part of it. And remember, this is the big part of the controversy between Inman and Kimball is what's a data warehouse? You know, yes, what's a data warehouse? Okay. I don't even think it's necessarily the best term for it. Maybe information.
Explain yourself to that.
Explain myself.
Yeah. Why do you think it's not a good term for data warehouse?
I don't know. I mean, it's as good as thing as any. You know, the Kimball group later said they call it the DW/BI process.
Okay.
When they said data warehousing, especially in the 90s, it meant the entire process from start to finish, from interviewing the customers to figure out what they needed to supporting the finished reports in the system. To me, when I think data warehouse, it seems to be sort of more back end. You know, you got that data engineering team, and that's kind of the data warehouse part. And believe me, I've seen plenty of data engineering teams spend a lot of time playing around with getting data in and stuff and not doing much on modeling the data or anything. And that's where the real key part is for me.
So it falls down at that point by like you could bring it in and you could warehouse it and just kind of have everything sitting on the shelf, but you're not getting anything to the end consumer yet.
Sort of, yeah. That's part of
it's kind of
the connotation.
And when you look at studies that say a high percentage of projects fail, it's probably because they never got anything out. So
and here's another thing I want to get in before I forget too is, again, Kimball wasn't, big on, the technology, and he didn't claim to have invented the star schema. He didn't, no one really invented it. Well, matter of fact, if I ever get to somewhere, it's been around forever. It is the relational model. In Dr. Codd's first paper defining relational databases in 1970, the first example he uses is a star schema. I can show you want me to show that real quick?
Yeah. Let's do that.
Let's do that right here. Let's see here.
We're doing it live.
Okay. Well, let's bring that over then. So there's Mr. Codd, E.F. Codd, or Ted Codd, as his friends would call him. Wrote a paper in 1969. Then it was the famous paper was 1970. This paper here. Of course, if you look at this is like the original, not just a text version, right? Mm-hmm. Well, when you look at this, this is the example I was talking about.
Okay.
Now, what do you see there? It's called supply. Okay, and these are all basically mostly keys, right? Supplier, part, project, and then a quantity value associated with it. So I see a supplier ID, a part, ID, and a project ID with quantity. Star schema, we're done, right? That's a fact table. And then, of course, the supplier would have its own entity type table with the supplier name and phone number and everything else. The part would have the same stuff. So when people say like dimensional modeling versus relational model, dimensional modeling is a part of relational modeling. It's just a different design, a different emphasis. It's saying, you know what? Instead of doing all these complicated things, we're going to have the design discipline to have just star schemas. We have a fact table in the middle. We have the dimensions around it. And we don't have this huge spaghettiness. That's all it really is.
This was 1970?
Yeah, it's 1970. Okay.
Yeah. Son of a... I mean, this... I don't want to give my age necessarily away, but this is older than I am. So,
well, yeah, but that's the point I made. There's actually a good paper out there some academics wrote in, I don't know, it was like 2003 that do a pretty good explanation of this too. And the other thing is the term, while I'm talking about it, is people will use the term denormalized a lot, and they throw that around here, which I think is sort of database-ish. But in a star schema, the fact table is in third normal form. Like this is a third normal form database, right? Okay. You've got keys, you've got the quantity. You really can't break this up without breaking the information that supplier 1 supplies part 2 for project 5 to with the quantity of 17. And then your dimensions, when people say denormalize, that's the dimensions. And you're right, they're not third normal form, because we take things like if you have a product and you have a subcategory and a category, we mash them all up together. So when they say snowflake, which again isn't really its own thing, it's just, okay, yes, for some reason you need a dimension and you want some things branched off from that, more third normal form. Yeah, okay, you have a snowflake, you got third normal form. Congratulations. You now probably also made it harder for that user to browse that, database. And the whole point of, the business intelligence data warehouse approach is to make sure the data is easy to use for the user and is fast, and you're working against both those things. So,
yeah, and I think that's why Kimball started really talking more about dimension grouping, right? Because you talk about the attributes about this dimension and what kind of makes it up, and you start grouping it together,
and
and put that. So you do kind of denormalize a little bit there than what you would if it was third normal, but those groupings is what makes the model make more sense and is easier to use.
Yeah. And then, by the way, the other guy, and this is another guy I didn't actually read until this year, about a year ago. Anybody ever hear of CJ Date, Chris Date?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is the man that wrote the first database book in 19. He worked for IBM, worked with COD. He said he wrote it in 73, right? And it was actually, first edition was published in 75. I have this 77 edition. There were 8 editions. I think the last one was 2004. And he's a wonderful, eccentric British guy. He's still alive. He's still pushing books. He's kind of like Inman. I think he's got to make money trying to get book royalties. So it's the same book like 50 times, right? But you can search him out. And he's got some, if you get on an O'Reilly.com subscription, he's got some wonderful like 20-hour video courses where he goes through some of his books that you can watch on there. Again, this is a famous example he used, because the funny thing with this guy, it's always the same example. This supplier parts, suppliers type example, because he uses like 3 examples for like 50 years or something. But again, supplier, part, and then this is very similar to what we had before. We just don't have the project in here.
I remember S1P1. I remember this from somewhere.
Yes. So this is what he uses. And as you see, this is all so what Chris Date and COD, kind of the founders of the database, relational database, this is what they thought of in databases. They weren't thinking of all sorts of weird header detail and all this. They were just thought, hey, you've got these dimension type things, right? And you've got some sort of, having many, a many-to-many relationship wasn't a big deal. That was just kind of a normal thing to them. Whereas when you get into the traditional database theory, people get kind of wound up over everything's a one-to-many, header detail type thing. Now, the bad thing, and by the way, I found Chris Date because Kimball mentioned him. He mentioned him as early as his 1995 magazine articles about, I was looking through my old database book, and you know what? I'm seeing a star schema here, right? And that's how I got into him. But he's always been disparaging kind of on data warehousing and star schema, mostly because of, all the bad things done in, what is, people will call it denormalization. But what you see here is what he did sort of say is the same thing I've been saying is, well, honestly, a star schema is a proper relational database design if you're going to do it, as long as you're following the other rules of database stuff. So anyway, that's probably enough on that. I don't think.
Well, everything kind of evolved to help solve problems that existed in the day too, right? Is hardware was a whole lot different, right? And processing was a whole lot different. So you had to use certain design techniques in certain areas, right, in order to help the machine kind of pick up some speed. And I think
storage was fantastically expensive.
Exactly.
Right.
And so you had to do things this way in order to kind of help implement how it was going to go. And that's actually one of the big reasons there was OLTP and OLAP, right?
Oh my gosh. I'm literally just realizing the first computer I ever owned was like $3,000 and it had less storage than what we can send in an email today.
Oh yeah. It's amazing.
Well,
right? And like, holy crap. And now we just fling it around to the
it's just crazy. And to tell you the truth, that's what the whole thing with the Vertipack engine. The thing was there is now you didn't have to do really fancy hardware and software things and indexing things to get a data warehouse thing to run fast. That's what I love about it. It's like, wow, I have a database where I don't have to worry about creating indexes to make it run fast and everything else. I just throw it in there and it works. In some ways it sort of makes sure to get keys for you under the hood and it's kind of amazing. And Kimball was actually involved with some of that stuff too.
And I think kind of up to a certain point, right? So you could do some models and everything or some type of reporting and just go against some of the best practices. And you're right, Vertipack will help take care of it for you. Yeah. But if you get back to kind of what you were just showing, right, and say, this is why we say start with a star schema, because not only will it help you out in the beginning, as you grow, you won't have to rechange everything, right? So that to me is one of the big reasons to do it, because it still performs better if you do it the right way.
And we'll run out of time. I mean, I've got a few slides I'm going to show, but yeah, the conclusion I came to after I started researching my problem in 2021 was use the star schema. Now, there's some things where, you can get an answer maybe a little easier, like having two fact tables connected together to have, here's the order header, and then I've got the line header, and I'll just connect them, right? And I can do a bidirectional relationship. I can do something crazy, but performance-wise, that was blowing up once you started getting into millions of rows and stuff. It just really wasn't working. And so I've come back to this, and for some things that you want to do, you're going to have to do some work, probably some ETL work, create some new, fact tables. There's actually a good example this week at SQLBI.com where they had a problem with
was the AR aging? Was that?
Yeah, the aging thing, where the solution to it, this is similar to what they've done in their books, was, well, you can either write some really complicated slow DAX, or you go in there and you maybe sort of pre-aggregate might be the wrong word, but you make some summary type tables that once you get those built, then the DAX will be simple and your stuff will run fast. But there is some remodeling work to do.
I've often thought of those as so star schema is most efficient for analytics across, if you go back to your star, right? Where you're reviewing and you're trying to have performance across all of these dimensions, and then potentially conforming dimensions to other fact tables.
Right, which is this part here.
Yeah.
And remember, the two things are, the understandable is probably the biggest thing, So when you get done setting things up, you deliver to that business user a bunch of dimensions, hooked up to some fact tables, and they're just dragging and dropping to build the reports. It's an understandable process for them. And
I will say there are use cases for integrating into the star schema one big table that for like specific like operational or detail level reports that span multiple fact tables and have odd granularities or cohorting inside of it, like the order dilemma that SQL BI was highlighting.
Yeah.
So
and and I think both Chris Adamson and Kimball talk about, like, they have a thing like derived tables, like you have first order tables, which are your simple star schemas, and then you could have some where you pre-join in ETL two fact tables together. Maybe you're trying to compare directly. You want to just directly compare the forecast minus the actual, and for performance reasons or whatever else, you can just sort of combine them together. But the thing is, you do that in the ETL. You do not do that in the final semantic model where you're joining those two fact tables together to get some curve filtering.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And and if you want to stay on this other one real quick, and again, just to go back to the whole Inman Kimball thing. So to Kimball, and the controversial thing was, he said the data warehouse, as he thought of it, was a system of many fact tables with the conformed dimensions. He said, you got to have the conformed dimensions, and then all these fact tables with their dimensions, hopefully mostly shared as much as you can, and some that are not shared. That's what he called the data warehouse. Inman would say the data warehouse is no, that's his third normal form, what looks like a real database thing. You build that. That's your data warehouse. And then these data marts, these stars, you'll build that afterwards, and I guess somehow make sure that they're conformed or whatever. So I don't know, for that's worth. Well, how much time we got? We got 15 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah.
So you guys
10
want
minutes.
some Kimball history, or?
Yeah, let's talk history.
Yeah.
So far, I've been really impressed. I had no idea, but
yeah. By the way, this is like, if you go to Google Books Ngram Viewer, you can put in phrases and see how popular they are in books. It's so obviously you see here with star schema, nothing really shows up on the radar to about 1993, 94. And by the way, I have not found the word star schema in print before 1993. And the problem really is this whole thing was, I don't know who coined star schema. So you've got data cubes, you've got star join, multidimensional, databases is another term. And remember, all these things started out way before. And here's a couple examples before Kimball started doing his thing, because people were doing. But basically, what the OLAP was a special sort of database. You say, no, the relational database doesn't handle this. We're going to create something called a multidimensional database. And this is what the original analysis services, the MDX version, was based on. Is you've got to have the facts, you got to have the dimensions, and it's sort of like you have this this multidimensional cube, and you're adding up things at the intersections and the edges of these things. So, but anyway,
notice,
as far as this
inside
is
of here, no DEX columns.
Yeah. So anyway, 93, that's the Mark Demarest actually chatted with him on LinkedIn. The other thing is LinkedIn is a great research tool. You can go look, you've heard of somebody, you go look them up. Some people fill out all their bios exactly where they worked at. And you go, oh, okay, let's see if this guy worked here. And you can put company names in and get a whole list of people that worked at a certain company at a certain time. So for instance, these two guys, Mark Demarest and also Stephen Peterson, had a very interesting blog post, and he presented this paper in August of 94. Both worked for Sequent Computer Systems. Okay. And these were a multiprocessor database thing. We think all this stuff with, Spark and all these multiprocessors new. Well, people were doing this since the 80s. Teradata, Sequent, there were a few others. Now, of course, they were doing it a little differently, right? But they were trying to solve big problems. In this case, do big analysis of big numbers, and obviously throwing processors is part of it. So these guys were working with Ralph Kimball's company called Red Brick, and we'll talk about them in a second. And Kimball's Red Brick was basically a specialized database for doing more like star schema type stuff fast. And so they had some special indexes and to be able to handle it. And they were trying to sell that to companies like Sequent to include in their systems and things like that. I'm just kind of going through the slides somewhere. This is when Kimball started publishing stuff, by the way. In June of 94, in July, all these things were coming out in, as you see, in 90, this is, by the way, so it was written in September 93. It was published in, I believe, May of 94 in DBMS magazine. And then this STARS thing was basically out in around June or July. Kimball started doing some magazine articles in 94. And by the way, this July 94 is really good because it's an interview with him. So you sort of get more of a raw take on what he's doing.
And it was called DSS around that time, the Decision Support System.
Yeah, well, let me go through the timeline real quick. So like I was saying, Kimball gives credit to the ideas, effects, and dimensions. There was apparently a data cube project between General Mills and Minneapolis. And by the way, Minneapolis is huge in all this stuff in the 1960s. And I haven't found this. I'll probably have to go to the Dartmouth library and have them try to research this thing. But, data cubes, and, mathematically, if anyone's ever had programming with three-dimensional arrays or something, I mean, there was stuff out there certainly in the 60s. And then really, and this is probably one of the biggest influences on Kimball, he gives credit to A.C. Nielsen. These are the guys that do surveys and stuff. And they used to basically tell retailers, grocery stores, hey, how much are you selling, what brands are selling, et cetera else. Because when he was working with them in the early 80s, they were saying, hey, we're trying to sell this data to people, and for them to make sense of them, we have to conform the dimensions. We got to make sure that when we say, product, it's the same thing by product, that kind of thing. And so that's where Kimball got the idea, was from working with A.C. Nielsen. And as Kevin was saying, the term for what we call data warehousing business intelligence was DSS in the 1980s. Oftentimes very more higher level, kind of more what we call like data science, not just the reporting the numbers, but we want to analyze this and predict the future and try to impact production. Data warehouse started to come out in 88. There's actually a guy named Barry Devlin did the information warehouse. Of course, Bill Inman complains, data warehouse. I'm not exactly sure when he first got that in print. 1992 is when his book came out. By the way, I think business intelligence, the term was coined in 1989.
What?
OLAP was
Really?
coined in 93.
89?
Todd. Yeah, 89, I believe.
Okay.
So it's what I found, at least one of my things. OLAP was even though it was kind of around, there's a lot of these, though, kind of like pivot table type systems in the 80s. ComShare, there was System W, a few other things that were going on there. And these are what I call that multidimensional approach, which is, kind of what went into that first version of Certus. And the other approach was the one that Kimball and others championed. Was like, no, we've got the relational database. We can make this work. It's just, obviously you had some performance problems from the start. And again, Kimball, his book, that first book actually finally got finished in mid '95 and published in February of '96 is when his book came out. And then, analysis services, as our first edition was 2000. Then as the modern BI sort of was Tableau and others, and Power BI and Power Pivot, maybe 2010 or so. So
that's fascinating.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So I guess what I'm doing the Kimball history real quick.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
So Kimball's 80 this last summer. He's been retired for 10 years. So he was 70 when he retired. He's plenty old enough to be able to retire. And actually, part of the reason the Kimball Group retired is one of their members died of cancer fairly suddenly in 2014. And I think they started thinking, you know what? Maybe we need to enjoy life or something.
Yeah.
But this is a smart guy. He got a doctor. It's from the electrical engineering. He basically did some sort of what we'd call probably more like AI, but some calculus tutor program for a PhD dissertation in '72. And then he went to work for Xerox PARC in '73. And this is the broad brush. I'm going to go through this real quick. So these are the guys that came up with the Star workstation, which is what basically Steve Jobs stole for the Macintosh. And then has anyone ever heard of this company? Maybe you guys have heard since I've told you, Metaphor Computer Systems.
No.
Yeah, I think I've only heard it through you. So
okay. This is a spinoff of some executives and people like Kimball from the Xerox PARC project to do basically DSS type stuff. Okay. For people. And it was kind of like, but they were kind of like the Mac, but they had their own hardware, their own wireless mouse. Everything was invented then. They had their own networking. They must have had their own sort of database. And remember, databases, the database standard didn't come out to first one, 86. So in the early 80s, databases were still brand new. I think the first commercial one was Oracle in '79. They were a brand new, high-tech, super, goofy thing people were doing. I mentioned the system Redbrick. He had left.
Donald, you're not moving enough. Your lights went off in your office.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, forgot about that.
So it's okay.
It's fine. We can still see you.
Yeah,
okay.
We can still see you. But holy
cow. The interesting thing, one thing I want to mention with Kimball too, again, his whole thing with BI wasn't the technology, it was the business. He said, look, the whole point is that you need to be at least probably more interested in the business than you are in the technology. You've got to be interested in the business, interested in the technology, and interested in the process. Because your whole purpose is to provide value for the business. And him and Roger Ross would say, we could care about, Inman, Kimball, whatever. Is the business using your stuff? And are they getting value out of it? That's what's important. Whatever works, that's the bottom line here. And if you think about it, he was working on a tutoring project for his thesis. He was the guy, Xerox PARC, a lot of the GUI stuff we take for granted was worked on by that group. And he had a hand in that. As far as how do you make this stuff understandable for people to use this computer that aren't computer experts doing things by the command line. So he's always thinking that user, one of his sayings is hey, if you're a BI guy, you should be sitting with the business and figuring out what they do and then help them out. So all these things I think sort of influence his later BI stuff. But like I said, he was Xerox PARC. He actually introduced the first workstation in '81. But then, like I said, they left. Him and some other exec from Xerox left, formed this Metaphor Computer Systems. We'll cover them in a second. Then he was only there for about 4 years. I'm not quite sure. Seemed like maybe he left a little early. I'm not sure. But that's where a lot of the work at Metaphor on the Star Scheme got started. This Redbrick Systems got started in '86, which was kind of trying to build a database that could run Star Schemas fast. And that was later spun out in about 93, 94. I think they got a CEO to run it. And he was basically certainly full-time consulting, doing the work that would lead to his book by '92. And I'm sure he was doing more stuff before then. Like I said, the book came out then. And after '96 was basically same old for about 20 years until they retired in 2015. Right.
Wow.
So real quick, because I know we're running out of time. Here's some pictures. There's Kimball back. There's a YouTube video with him, by the way. You can see him pretending to be a user using the Xerox Macintosh type system back in there. That's a picture of him when he worked at this Metaphor computer company. You see the computer there? Look at wireless mouse. Wow, first wireless mouse in the world. Here's the famous thing here. And again, so the biggest thing that for us out of BI was Metaphor Computer System. We're basically doing, what we call data warehousing, decision support with easy to use things for the business. In 1984 is when they started working. And from I say 84 to 88, they're doing great. Then IBM got involved, and They went on to about 94, and then IBM basically shut them down. Okay, but that's where he talked to the Nielsen guys, sort of got the idea is, hey, we should build simpler database structures for people to use the star schema. He taught this to a bunch of people, Archie Ross, all these other people. That's where a lot of this stuff must have come from, even though I can't quite find it necessarily in print. This is the thing he did it at Metaphor. And he wasn't the engineer on it, but he was certainly one of the program managers on it. Is this thing called Capsule. And I don't have time to explain, but this is basically a combination of data of Power Query and what's the other thing we do for automation nowadays? Power Automate.
Power Automate or Logic
so
apps.
And by the way, this still is alive because it finally got ported from the proprietary hardware and everything in the 90s.
And it runs on like a DOS emulator now?
No, it actually runs. It runs in Windows. I've got to see if I can get a license turned on. And I don't think they're doing much. They actually, about 2014 was the last time they were really active. But yeah, the software's there. I can download the software. I just have to get a license key. But there's all icons, data flows. Hey, I get data from a database. I put it in Excel. I can save a bunch of reports.
Is this the whole reason why everybody asked for things to export to Excel? Was this the start of it?
Right here.
But this would let a normal business user with no programming. And believe me, I've tried Power Automate, and you're still a little bit more programming than you'd like.
Yeah.
This is actually a pretty simple system, and people were doing stuff. And you can't read this. But...
Hold on one second. Donald, I am fascinated, and the chat is fascinated by this. But we are unfortunately nearing the end of our time together today. Would you be interested in coming back on to continue this conversation next week or the week after, something like that?
Well, we've got BI Atlanta next week. Maybe like in a month or two, maybe.
Okay. We're going to have you back on, right? So don't worry. And if you're on the channel, don't worry. We will get Donald back for part 2 of Kimball modeling. Okay.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Wow.
Awesome. All right. So yes, encore Steen is looking for, and Mim wants it too. So yes, everyone wants you back, Donald. Excited to I mean, this is a first, right? Everyone's kind of you're the first guest who's had command repeat performances in the first in the chat. So excited for you, Donald.
All right. Well, thank you.
So we're going to give you the parting words. What if you were going to have something to tell people to do today? What would that be, Donald?
I would say go to that KimballGroup.com and look at some of those articles that they wrote. Let me make sure I got KimballGroup.com.
Yeah, good advice. Get started with his articles. I go back to a lot of them too, just to re-reference.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Who needs more cowbell when we can get more Donald Parish?
And if we ever get somebody to argue for Inman's side, I'd feel free to debate them sometime. But I don't think you will because no one uses Inman stuff.
Holy crap! An Inman Kimball debate was featuring Donald Parish.
We might have to find somebody for that. That would be interesting.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Kevin, do you want to take us out? Wish everyone good luck.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and you have the best day ever. Peace.
All right. See some of you in Atlanta, maybe. Bye.
Yep.
Digital combines strategic industry insight and advanced technical expertise to uncover and solve your digital transformation challenges. If you're interested in learning more, check out our website at bakertilly.com/digital.